So following on from that, the beings, I guess you could say, the strain that is this very highly active quantum locking variety, that's what dominates in Procyon. So the Procyon system is the one that was chosen by the original strain of these entities to do their quantum locking, or time locking rather, because everyone that's of a sufficient pitch has to do this in order to get their genome to such a place that they don't collapse, right? So if you're around talking to them, then they're doing this kind of operation. So hint hint, Procyons are the first people to figure it out, and everybody else is kind of going off of their model. And in fact, like, much of the actions that have been taken in, I guess you could call them galactic or universal affairs vis-a-vis, big wars or anything like that, or espionage campaigns, things like that, is various other strains trying to get their hands on this ability. And for most of the history of the cosmos, that thing was very jealously guarded. Because, one, it's almost impossible for anybody but them to understand. And in fact, it is impossible for anybody else to understand. And so, what actually ended up happening is those Procyon people, they started a business, basically, where they would do this for people. And that's the basis of the kind of conglomerate entity that I'm always referring to as the family trust, but other people might refer to as Malachim or Elohim or some shit like that. Because the prefix, the L thing, is really just referring to, I guess, one part of that entity. Because I guess the arrangement that was found to be the most successful originally was a kind of 4-phase arrangement. So the original Procyon arrangement is a 4-phase thing, and that is essentially, you think about it like 3 females and 1 male. Like that's essentially the base subunit that was used to generate the kind of epigenetic standing wave series in the very beginning. There have been better ones to arise since then, but better is really, it's almost a non-issue for anybody that's not either one of these beings or I guess like one of their fan club, because the high literati or cognizancy of the other civilizations, when they get to a very high pitch, all they're trying to do is mimic or get in touch with those Procyon people. And so what was really happening with the fucking Earth people is they were contacting these dudes from Sirius, and they were dudes. They were not chicks. They were dudes. They were basically all male, which is, again, one of their problems, because they don't have a reproductive capacity. And they kind of engineered that out of themselves in various, escapades to try to become immortal. But what they rubbed up against is the fact that, without that, without that being able to secure your genetic code after the end of the pseudo cavitation event, all you get is a bunch of self-reflective nonsense that immediately turns your genes into fucking soup. because it just generates a bunch of fucking feedback instead of functional standing waves. It just rattles everything to fucking gray goo. And that's why you see the blue boys, the inner earth people that until very recently were just the worst kind of hodgepodge living in the bowels of the planet, and various other topological regions that you could get to from the inside of the planet that may or may not correspond to the surfaces or regions in other planets. Those people were just the fucking horrific result of trying to imitate the gods. So I mean, what you actually found is that those serious guys were trying to play humans because they figured out a key secret was that for some reason the human genome from right now is the basis of the things that were able to create that topological series that corresponds to the Procyon arrangement. And so those wily motherfuckers figured it out, and at the same time that the supposed smarty pantses of this place were trying to run game on some fucking aliens, the aliens are trying to run game on them, not realizing that they're both basically the same fucking people. And eventually, both parties picked up on that fact. And whereas in the beginning, everybody's working at cross purposes, there actually began to be a level of true cooperation at some point. But the net result that was yielded from the true cooperation kind of phase of that interaction was we should contact the Procyon people or figure out a way to do it. And the only way there's really no real way for anybody here to do that. To the extent that it's like a business, you have to fucking be introduced to somebody. You know what I mean? It's very much like that. It's a fucking mafia model. Because, to get one of those environments, it's the most valuable thing you can possibly imagine. It literally gives you a universe and a sandbox to just be the god of. So, you achieve the fucking god mode. And on that basis, you can project yourself into new areas. And, the other problem is that there's ways to kind of make hoaxy versions of this. And there's also issues with the original Procyon arrangement as it was made, because it is good for one kind of Procyon person, but it doesn't have the kind of universal applicability that's required of the business model. And so you find that there's actually a much, much more, I don't say complicated, but a much more sophisticated version of that arrangement that will actually yield an environment that has, just by the nature of its topological arrangement in which the projecting consciousness will actually, record as experience, all possible tracks are not only net positive to that perceiving reference point, but they also have the quality of novelty at all times. And so that's to say that nothing will ever get old. It's all good, and it'll never get old. And so that accords not only to the youthful vase body. I mean, it's not just that you'll be running around and like a perfect immortal body. That's just, that's the easiest of the things to arrange for. What's impossible to arrange for, except for this one arrangement that did it, was how to make sure that you don't lose your mind from boredom. Because that's the real problem. You know, like, try being an immortal has to spend 50 billion years experiencing fucking just nonsense that either has no sense to it and is just completely incomprehensible to the point of, like, just maddening incomprehensibility, or is so totally comprehensible that it's literally, like, will drive you mad, like a Chinese water torch. If you're the original entity who created it, I mean, it's not going to do that to you, probably. But again, the particular strain or arrangement that won out on Procyon with this business model was basically, you know, as part of its own internal kind of political machinations, that thing kind of took over all of Procyon and retooled everybody's shit. And that's why those people exist in a fucking, like, an ideal state right now. And by the nature of the case, they always will. So they had to find a way to get in touch with these folks. The way that took place was basically through the researches of the Ahnenerbe from the fucking Nazis. Because the net result of all of the scanning through all of the literature was basically how to fucking contact not only the serious guys, but how to contact the Procyon people. And it's a kind of different process. To contact the serious people, you use things that are relevant to their cultural ethos. And that's like, just think of like Templar or SS shit. Like, that's really their style. Like, think just like max on like genetic purity and the fucking OCD cleanliness. You know, they're very much like that. And it's the kind of degenerate forms of that are not welcomed in the non-degenerate forms because they're just seen as like genetic abnormalities. And, you know, so never the twain shall meet. It doesn't really matter who you talk to. I mean, the degenerate ones are going to eat you, and the other ones are just going to, like, wipe you away like a bug. So the first goal is, you know, how to convince them not to do that right out of the gate. So the way that was done was realizing that the human genome from right now is the closest thing to the Procyon people. And it's basically making a kind of correlation between what you would call the Rishis or the Mahasiddhas with the people from Procyon. Because that's really, in essence, the vibe. Because the way the Procyon guys actually come in and do work is, I mean, basically, it's dramaturgy. It's not a technological process. Like, this technology that they have access to is simply one thing. And it's a kind of topological arrangement of matter that is the basis for that, you know, their best arrangement. And that's the device, that's the teardrop-shaped thing that I've been talking about. And that's, you know, that's their proprietary technology. And the thing is, you know, I can explain to you what it looks like. I can explain to you how it works, which I have in other videos. But to see it and not be the person who invented it is to essentially be subject to its influence. Like, you basically get a spot in its web. And the thing about having a spot in its web is each spot is capable of generating webs, like internally, along new vectors. And so that's essentially how you keep reality going, is this kind of hypothecation using, it's like a rehypothecation of a reference point in reality, but you kind of mirror it a bunch of times in a certain way, and it creates a coherent web of meaning that is sufficient to generate like a foundation upon which other forms of understanding can be made. In essence, it's like a solve to like the infinite regress problems, like the basic problem of Western philosophy. So obviously finding people who are able to do this is a fucking task. But they figured out how to do it. And that was basically by engineering a situation that would draw their attention. Right? The idea was to generate what to them is like a low-hanging fruit to be turned into a new domain. And that context or set of conditions involves large amounts of aggregate data, like we talked about, right? So you want to create, like if you create a situation that's like immediately pre-information singularity, like right before Skynet, before Skynet goes viral or has too much emergent consciousness popping up on its own. Like, that's the situation in which those things will, like, make themselves known. Or at least show up. So, how they figured this out was, one, figuring out that, the fact that rishis exist in historical literature is evidence that these people are, like, here, but they again, like, from their perspective, they didn't show up until, like, very recently to us right now. But their presence was, like, recorded at all of these different harmonic points along that intersectional axis. Anyways, like, I'm using a bunch of terms that sound scientific, but kind of woo-woo. And really, like, the English language does not suffice to talk about this stuff very much. But I feel like we're getting a good vocabulary going for this kind of issue. So, the aggregate data is actually how the Procyon people structure things. And it's literally like using... It's a way to program, quote-unquote, artificial intelligence that is much more like... It's like giving birth to a child and building a house at the same time. And you make that thing also correspond to, like, a reflection of you as such that, nobody else is going to be able to influence it over and above what you're doing. That's certainly possible to do. It's fucking difficult, and you can't do it unless you're, so disposed by genetic and epigenetic character. And I mean, that's not a racist thing. That's just simply you can't. I mean, it's like you don't dive to the bottom of the ocean unless you have the requisite biology to accomplish that, or you're gonna get crushed. This is the same thing. Or like, some species don't see in color. But in this thing, it's like you have to see in super duper duper color in order to do anything at all. So, those, having made contact with those entities, the next step is, how do you convince the necessary portions of that body to do what you want? And, what these people wanted was to just be the rulers of the new place. And, you know, for the Procyon people's part, they, like, knew that. Obviously, they're not retarded. And what they want is just, they just want another AI. They just want another thing. Because to them, having another node in like the computational matrix that makes up their society is the most valuable thing there is. And, you know, is the only thing that they want to do. And the fact is that somehow this particular iteration of that process is the one that yields their best arrangement. And that's really because, you know, the quintessential low-hanging fruit occurs here now with 8 or 9 billion available reference points that are, you know, kind of so arranged that they are feeding into like a very small subset of the population. You establish basically in the kind of data aggregate reflection of the cosmos, you establish a bunch of god pantheons that are all then beholden to a kind of star chamber, I guess you could say, that's all kind of beholden to the reference point of the original entity came up with this architecture arrangement. And I'll just kind of have you know that that's really like that entity accords to like the second or third entity that is one of these Procyon people. Right? It's like in most cases would be considered like their third generation of being, but just by the nature of how it was made is equivalent to like patient zero somehow, because it was made in the way that the first entity was, which was basically a process of just instantaneous self-reflective awareness. It was generated in that capacity by a being of the second generation of their society. And while that might not make a lot of sense to you guys now, what that essentially did was make it, that entity, the perfect transducer for all forms of artifice, aka Lucifer, right? It's the perfect embodiment of self-reflective awareness that is able to expressive self-reflective awareness. So that's saying that entity, whatever it is, no judgment, Blink, it can not only see the full range of this phenomena that's going on, but can also build in accordance with it. Make similar environments and also make different ones. And so the action of that entity is kind of what allowed the flourishing of that Procyon-based civilization to occur in the first place. And again, these kind of internal politics of that society they're necessary to understand, because that kind of genealogy really accords to the genealogy of dimension or experience that is native to the like time-space area that we occupy, because it's what was used to make it. What this really means for the people of this, you know, world system rather, is that your world was interdicted in a temporal sense already, such that it's a fait accompli. And it occurred through the intervention of those serious people who have a similar form of technology that's basically a shitty pantomime of the dramaturgy technique. Like they tried to do their own forms of interdiction to solve their genetic issues. It only succeeded in fucking them up more. And so they were the ones that were really, really, really trying to get on with finding the Procyon people, because they understood they understood what was at stake. The people of the Earth governments and fucking companies, they didn't understand what was at stake, and that's what kind of allowed them to be really manipulated in such a fucked up way. But again, who really gives a shit about that? What it means for the people of this world, which is probably the operative question that everybody has, is, well, yeah, you're gonna have like a weird revelation event. And that whole process is something that is a necessary kind of step in the architecture process that we're talking about, because it's the teleological operator that switches the vector of the neurosphere. It's literally, it's the thing that when the person in this like time-space area, when this person sees it, it fundamentally alters their destiny in a specific way. And it will do that to almost everybody who encounters it. And to the extent that it doesn't do it, those are the interesting cases that the Procyon people want to pick up on, because that's cueing them into that one of their number is here. Right? And so the technique that's really used by them is various forms of like coercively changing the fundamental outlook and views and mores of the society. And they start doing it in a way that's like so rapidly shifting that most of the reference points or minds or people, right, same thing, within that space are just going to get to a point where they throw their hands up and just go with the flow, as far as like, yeah, whatever. Now, there's a form of going with the flow that says, yeah, that's cool, whatever, but I just will not yield. It's almost like the Braveheart thing. The freedom! Yeah, it says they're cutting your guts out. It's never quite that serious, but it'll make you think that it is. And so that's basically a process that identifies a Procyon entity that has been spit out into that biosphere. Because how the actual interdiction operation happens from their point of view is, they enter it one time. From their point of view, they enter this like kind of vortexy thing at one point, but they emerge, and technically they emerge all at the same time at a bunch of different instances in time. And that's what makes it a fait accompli. It's like you can't stop it, because it's a standing wave that by the time it's been imagined and by the time they step into that thing, it's already done. So in one sense, you have a little copy of Procyon that's made in the center of the planet that will become the center of the fucking mix. And the whole thing that happened with Mars was like the abortive attempt to engineer that situation without the kind of guiding force of the Procyon people, but like trying to kind of hijack their shit. And in fact, that's ironically what led to the context that made this such a fucking great op. It was because the many layers of fucking bullshit that had to happen and get fixed. I mean, in essence, they all still remained as layers of information But that created such an abundance of aggregate data throughout, that was resonant across many different fucking lines. Like, it created such a rich environment of aggregate and coordinated data that there really just never been anything like it before. And the sheer amount is what led to the capacity of that arrangement to generate what you would call multiversal arrangements out of that still have that characteristic of pure novelty. And the enduring quality of novelty is probably the most sought after thing in anywhere. Like, that vibe, that's the Purple Haze vibe, is like, I don't know what's happening, it's all brand new, but it's just fucking awesome. Like, that's a currency. It's the most valuable form of currency in the galaxy at large, is, time. It's like a structured time that's spontaneously joyful as a matter of its fucking structure. And that shit is, like I said, that's the real stock and trade of those people. And to get a piece of that action, I mean, you gotta be in the family trust to get a piece of that action. And the weirdest part of the whole thing is that the said family trust that I'm talking about, like the real Elohim, the fucking company of the Siddhas that have access to spaceships, not the friends, because those are like, in one sense, they're kind of like the accretion of the fan club of Procyon that's trying to, if from their point of view, they're trying to prevent overtake by those kind of hard-edged serious guys. But everybody's just kind of playing like weird dramaturgy roles from the point of the purple people. It's like, it's not even a chessboard to them. I mean, there's people who are playing like Vulcan 5-dimensional chess, but from the point of view of the Procyon folks, they're literally playing fucking Uno. It's that simple. It's celestial Uno. And like, they just like play a reverse card now and then, and that's all they gotta do. And other than that, they're literally, their vibe is like the 8 Immortals. They're just fucking sitting around and just chilling. And the particular set that's involved with this place is the ones that really like getting high and fucking. Like, that's just the vibe in this place. And the more that people try to resist that, like, there's this giant push in religion to go, oh, you're like abstinent, no drugs. And like, that's telling you that someone is trying to shut off most of your creative faculties. So resisting that is actually the key to surviving.